and in all the professionalness, despite us having done this for like 2 months now, I still have not made a title card up yet. Which means while I'm waiting for it to come through and show that it's actually gone live to make sure it's worked, people can still hear everything. So hello everyone, now that has actually gone live, and is showing me like 15 seconds after it started. Welcome to episode 4 of Down Under Politics. Unfortunately, David is off with the Rona. Maybe not. He took a rat test, but you know, you can't trust rats because, I mean, they just look weird with their little noses and their tails. Strange animals. Don't know why they're using those for checking for viruses. It's beyond me. I just don't get it.
As far as I understand, rats have a history with epidemics.
Rats do have a history with epidemics, so... what was it, like 2/3 of the European population got wiped out of them?
1/3, but yes.
1/3, was it? Well, look. Rats, 1/3 of the entire European continent. Nazis, how many did they wipe out? Come on, Hitler, pick your game up.
For those who care, I'm Jewish and I approve this joke.
Look, if there was one thing that they taught me that actually stuck when I was doing sales while I was at uni, which, by the way, never do sales, it's the worst fucking thing ever, you will hate yourself, is that you can literally say anything you like as long as you seem genuine about it.
I don't know how much I like that. It's not much.
Look, there was this one person, and here's a nice mood breaker for everyone, to put everyone in a cheerful, kind of like what the actual fuck mood. There was one person who was talking to a potential customer, and I won't name them, or I won't name the company I was working for at the time. But they were talking to this customer whose partner had died relatively recently, and the customer was talking about how, this disaster's come through and it's done this horrible thing to some stuff he made, and the person I was working with just blurted out, "Well, lucky he died then." And I just went,
I'd just hang up.
That's one way to put it.
ironically, he got that sale. Case in point, as long as you don't say it in a way the way your tone is really mean, you can say literally anything.
Maybe that's the approach that Sky News has decided to take when it comes to nuclear power.
I think it is. I mean, look, I've decided that I have too much IQ from taking all of the brain force, so I decided to watch some Sky News to, take some IQ out, because apparently you can die from too much IQ if you have too much brain force. That's why they put the soy in there, to... Jesus. Oh, look, I'm expecting a phone call from Alex Jones's lawyer at any moment now.
Or his licensing people.
Possibly. But look, this is where I now tack on to the end, in my opinion. See, I checked with the lawyers. As long as I say in my opinion, I can say anything. Because it's just my opinion, and I'm allowed to have my opinion. Just like Clive Palmer is still a fatty McFuckhead.
In your opinion.
In my opinion, of course. Speaking of nuclear power, since that's all that Sky News has been clapping on about for the last 2 weeks, let's talk about nuclear power. That's fun, because New South Wales is still having power problems.
So, I love the fact that mainstream media, and yes, Sky News is mainstream media.
Yes, very much so.
Let's not get any delusions about them being part of the resistance or whatever people call it. They're still mainstream media. I love the fact that mainstream media is talking about nuclear. Hate the fact that it's Sky News.
Look, I also love that they're talking about it, because It means that they've stopped talking about coal.
They've admitted they lost that battle.
Well, look, in my opinion, the battle over nuclear has been lost as well. If you're pro-nuclear, sorry, Mitch. But,
How dare you?
look, facts don't care about your feelings.
You dare use my own spells against me, Potter?
Oh, look, just as long as no one makes the... Look, just so that we can get this out of our system, I'll make the joke now. Look, don't you think that if, let's say, the sea level rises by 5 feet, let's say 10 feet, don't you think people won't just sell their houses and move? There's just one problem, Ben. Sell their houses to whom? Fucking Aquaman! There, we've done the joke now. We can now move past that joke. It was hilarious. It was also, 6 years ago.
In the words of Sir Francis, hilarious and original.
Such a good joke. Thanks, Harris Bomber Guy. So there we go. Harris Bomber Guy joke. Stolen. Ticked off the list. Now, whose joke to steal next?
But when it comes back to nuclear power, I predicted that this would happen in 2019. After the federal election, then I actually saw the mainstream media in the Australian was starting to post up the odd article or two, about a month apart or so, about nuclear power. This has been in the works for a while, and then COVID hit and everything went out the window. If COVID hadn't hit, I predicted that they would have taken nuclear power to the next election.
Maybe.
To the 2022 election. And now they're getting back on track with it. I predict they'll take it to the 2025 election.
Look, I hope that they do. And I hope when you say they, you mean the Liberal Party.
Yeah, Liberals.
Look, Liberal Party strategy people, if you're watching this, please take nuclear power as an election issue to the next election. Now, please stop watching for the next bit.
He means it ironically. I mean it sincerely.
No, I mean it sincerely. I genuinely hope that they do. And here's my reason why. I hate the rest of their policies, and if they take nuclear power to the next election, they will be destroyed.
Don't be so sure of that. The numbers are actually, over the past 3 years, there's actually been a majority come over in favour of nuclear power. And if the mainstream media keeps on going on about it, then it's entirely possible they'll take the boomers with them too. The boomers are the last line of defence. All the young people like it.
That makes a lot of sense. Like, if they're able to keep coal going for this long and convince everyone that was okay, nuclear is easy for it. It's much more convincing.
The hard part is going to be getting the investment. As we've properly noted, most investors only want projects that return within the next 10 to 20 years, which is the sweet spot for renewable generation.
Yeah, it's like nuclear does make sense in some ways, but financially it doesn't. Not now anyway.
Financially, it doesn't.
It did 10 years ago, not now.
Well, financially, if you've already built a plant and you're able to find the long-term operation costs are negligible, and you can extend out your 40-year plant to 60 and possibly 80 years. I read the report you linked.
You actually read the report, all 236
I read the report, not all of it,
pages.
but I did. Not all of it, but I currently have in front of me 8.2 long-term operation of existing nuclear assets.
See, the problem that I see with that is that you're correct in that the ongoing running costs are low, but where I think there's some nuance in here that really needs to be drilled down on is that in order to achieve long-term operation of a nuclear power plant, it means that every 10 or 20 years or so, you have to refurbish it to bring it up to current standards, which is going to cost a lot of money. And it's the reason why a lot of nuclear power plants now that are privately owned, so just to be clear, talking about privately owned, not government-owned ones, because those are being shut down for political reasons primarily, not economic reasons, but the privately owned ones are being shut down because the cost to refurbish them and bring them up to modern standards is too high, and they can't get the investment to do it.
And if they're Generation 1 power plants, then I say good riddance.
Yeah. Which I mean,
because because Generation 1 power plants do actually have that risk of meltdown. I think it's better for nuclear that the old plants go.
I think
in
it's better
terms
for
of
all of us
public
that the old ones are going.
Hmm.
But
But it
unfortunately, a
benefits
side
nuclear's
effect of
public
that.
image.
What was that?
It benefits nuclear's public image
Yes.
for the old plants to go.
Yes, it does, because those are the ones that had that risk. The problem ultimately for nuclear there is that the cost of refurbishing them is refurbishing any old plants, not just the Generation 1s, and trying to bring those up to standard, because that's just not happening at all. But even more modern ones, bringing them up to standards every 10 or 20 years when they need to be refurbished, it costs a lot of money, and a lot of investors are just not willing to dump that sort of money into a project with the sort of time horizons for repayment on that investment.
Because we live in a society, I said the words, we live in a society where people don't want to plant trees under the shade of which their children will sit. Because here's my question to you: if we can extend the 40-year life of a nuclear power plant to 60 and even 80 years, obviously there's going to be some repairs and maintenance that are going to have to go on as well as that. But what's the possibility of sending it to 100 years, 120?
I'm not a nuclear scientist, so I don't know the answer to that
Yeah.
question. But
Slim to none.
I do understand the economics of it, and if it's not so much that you can take a nuclear power plant that's good for 40 years and extend it out to 60 or 80, it's you extend it out to 50 or 60, and then you have to go through the whole process of refurbishing it to get it out to 70 or 80 again 10 years later. So just as it's about to start breaking even again, you've got to go through the whole process.
So one also, I mean, again, I'm making reference to this report. One also looks at what's the right word for it? The learning discounts that happen 10 to 20% after the initial projects take place. Are we looking at a possibility where the plants that we're setting up now could be similarly long-lived? Now, again, I'm not saying the government has to be involved in this. I'm not saying the government should contribute a cent toward nuclear power, because
You're a libertarian and you don't believe
I'm a
that.
libertarian. I don't think the government should spend any money on any power. Let the economics speak for itself. And if we find that's the case, we may find that coal power, we're already finding that coal power with government subsidies is not, it's not measuring up.
Yeah, even
in
with
terms of
the
cost.
massive government I forget what the report I was reading was. I think it was the Q1 report from this year put out by the Australian Australian Renewable Energy Agency. And basically what it found was that we're spending more than 10 times as much on in subsidies on fossil fuels, sorry I lost the word for a moment, than we are on renewables. And renewables are growing exponentially faster than they probably should be as far as this report was concerned.
And there we're seeing the market forces at work. And again, I'm not opposed to market forces. If renewable energy is the more efficient way of doing things, then by all means, let it win in the marketplace of ideas.
From a market forces and profitability perspective, it's more efficient. But that's talking efficiency in the economics term, where efficiency means extracting more money for less input. Because that's the other thing you've got to keep in mind. And I was having a discussion with someone the other night about this. When you're talking about energy policy in a country, what should that policy be primarily serving? Should it be primarily serving the people who are invested in it and want to make money? Or should it be primarily serving the people of that nation?
Well, if it goes to renewable generation, there's no reason to suggest it's not doing both.
No, I agree. But what I'm saying is that kind of the framing of the discussion is just a little bit off, in that you have people saying, talking about efficiency in an economic sense, about something where extracting profit from it should not be the primary goal, but it's being framed up as though it is.
Noted. I definitely see where you're coming from on that point. I would also suggest, what do we class as for the good of the nation? Because to a certain extent, part of that is going to be, can people get energy cheaply?
Yes, and
that's going to be more of an issue as we start going towards electric cars as well.
Yes, it is, because it's going to be putting much greater strain on the energy grid. That's where the problem that I see ultimately with having a privatized energy grid is that electricity is not an industry that lends itself well to getting increased efficiency from privatization, because your end consumer does not care where the electrons come from. Electrons are electrons. So as far as the end consumer is concerned, all they care about is they want to pay as little as possible for the electricity that they consume in the overwhelming majority of cases. Of course, a lot of people would prefer it to not be turning the planet into a hothouse, but the majority of people, and this just ultimately comes from human psychology, is that they care about the short term before the long term. So they care about, can I afford to pay the bill primarily? And having an expensive middleman in there is just not a good way to do it.
And yeah, so this is going to be an issue. It's one of the reasons why my grandparents are so happy they've got solar on their house. They don't pay a cent for their energy bills.
And that's ultimately part of the reason why, despite the Liberal government's... Sorry, now we've got to steal a Friendly Geordies joke. The Liberal government's best efforts to slow down solar adoption and renewable adoption in general, where they've been hit smack in the face by the market forces that they claim to love so much, because the simple fact is, if you throw solar on the roof of your house, you're not paying for electricity anymore. And the solar panels then pay for themselves, and a lot of the time, you don't even have to front the upfront costs. I have a mate who's currently building a house, and part of their contract with one of the energy companies is they get the solar panels up front, they don't get any feed-in tariff off them for the first 5 years, and then after that, they're considered paid off.
Okay.
There you go. Yeah, I mean, and this is the other thing too. Decentralizing the energy grid is something that is probably a very good idea.
It's also, funnily enough, a fairly libertarian idea.
Exactly. That's why I've been so in favor of solar panels on houses, in stark contrast to a lot of people in my milieu who all talk about renewable energies are just a con. And I'm just like, well, no. If you agree that you as the end user should be responsible for as much as possible in your life, shouldn't you believe in renewable energy generation because it gives you that opportunity?
For me, it all comes down to which avoids me having blackouts. Like, if I got solar panels, then there's less chance of it happening, and that's all I care about.
Yeah, well, I mean, you have solar panels. If localized energy storage gets to a point where it becomes economically viable, which in the next 10 years I think is fairly likely to happen, then you start having people with localized storage. You have a smart meter that can control where the current that you're using is coming from, because at the moment you have control circuitry that allows you to use the solar electricity directly rather than feed it back into the grid and then buy electricity from the grid. I haven't looked into it personally because I'm not in the market for one at the moment, but I see absolutely no reason, if you can do that, you can't have one that goes, oh, the mains power just went out, I'm just going to use this battery instead.
Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, as we've talked about, renewables is the market at the moment. But what I'm suggesting, to bring it back to nuclear, and this is something that I remember from back in mid 2000, 2004, 2005, everyone was saying, give solar a chance. Yeah, it's not as cheap as fossil fuel generation, but don't you think we should be doing the right thing for the planet? And I thought, all right, well, that's an interesting way to put it. And I'm not suggesting that the government should give a cent towards nuclear energy. All I'm suggesting is that the government should give nuclear an opportunity. Just take away the moratorium. That's all I want. If the investors feel it's a good thing, if they think they can make it work, then they're more than welcome to. And I'm happy to throw some money at it too. No doubt we'll have enough regulations to keep us safe.
Well, I would hope so.
Knowing Australia, I think we'd have it set up in the safest way possible.
Look, I'm of the opinion it depends on which government's in power at the time, because I'm not sure I'd be willing to trust the Liberals not to try and rort that.
Yeah, but we have to keep in mind that it's not just the Liberal Party. We have the bureaucracy
state governments
as well
that are going to be part of that regulation.
And there's also the unelected bureaucrats as well who maintain the ship of state between switching governments.
This is true.
I'll feel better about it after we have the federal ICAC.
Well, yes.
Well, yeah. Look, federal ICAC's looking fairly interesting at the moment because there's a very, very strong push from, from the Greens is where I've been seeing the messaging through, but I understand a lot of the independents have also been pushing for this, to have the federal ICAC have a lot of teeth.
Good.
Like more teeth than the Labor Party kind of want. Which, if the government's currently in power and nervous about a anti-corruption commission, then I say, yep, definitely give it as many teeth as possible, because teeth are currency and green is best.
I reckon the federal ICAC is going to be the best reality show since Kenny vs. Benny. I can't wait for it.
I've seen some people arguing that because you don't have witness statements made public before they end up in court, that the federal ICAC should not be done the way that the New South Wales ICAC is done, where the hearings are made public. They want the hearings to be private.
Make those hearings public.
I agree. They should definitely be public, and here is my reason why. We already know that Tom's reason is because he wants a great reality TV show to replace Big Brother, and I'm totally on board with that. Big Brother had its time. It's time for federal ICAC to be broadcast at 8 o'clock every night on NBN. That was was it 10? I forget which channel Big Brother was on.
You sitting member, you've been found to be corrupt. You must leave the house.
Yes, but my reason for it is because I hold the position that those who have power over others should be held to a much, much higher standard than everyone else. So politicians should definitely they should just have their dirty laundry when it comes to political issues aired in public.
Yep.
Because they have to be held to a higher standard than everyone else.
Oh, speaking of corruption, have we been following the story of Barilaro this weekend?
Yes.
This week?
Didn't he
No.
decline the position now?
He has declined the position after the spotlight has been placed on him.
Because just to give a bit of context, there was... What was the position for in New York, Mitchell? I forget what the position was.
Oh, it was a
for.
trade commissioner of some kind.
That was it. Our former deputy premier here in New South Wales got a position as a trade commissioner in New York City, just after he had left New South Wales state politics as a result of being harassed by friendly Geordies, because that's definitely what happened. There's no way that it could just be that, friendly Geordies called him out for being a corrupt sack of shit, in my opinion.
In our opinion.
In my opinion, of course. So he got this job, and it turns out there was a shitload of corruption around it. Where was it two or three other people now that have come out and been like, yeah, I was meant to get it, but then he did some shady shit and he got it.
I believe there's something about that, and the crown jewel, like the cherry on top of all of this, it's a job that he himself inaugurated when he was in Parliament.
Yeah, that's just the cherry on top. Mwah, perfect. Look, I don't know how he thought he'd get away with it, to be honest. Mainly
got away
because
with so
he got
much.
away with basically everything else that he ever did that was shady as shit.
Well, he's been pork barrelaroing for quite a while. It's
Look, the
only fair
worst
that he
part
gives
is that
some of
he's
that to himself.
proud of it.
Mm.
He thinks that calling himself Pork Barrelaro is no, it's not.
Why don't we just go back to classical Rome and just hand out bribes to the voters? Let's just do that, shall we?
Look, I
Makes
think we
sense.
should do that, and while we're at it, let's go back to classical Rome and have privatized fire departments where every single fire truck will be sent out with a negotiator who will negotiate the price to put out the fire that is currently consuming your house while it burns. So you'd better be fast at negotiating.
Oh, Crassus.
Which
Crassus,
actually,
you beautiful man.
I'm curious, Mitchell. As a libertarian, obviously you kind of like things to be government's hands off and privatise as much as possible. Where do you draw that line? Because obviously from you making fun of that and laughing along with my joke just there, you don't think, at least I'm hoping I'm interpreting this correctly, you don't think we should have private fire forces.
So, my perspective as a libertarian is we need to make the government as accountable as possible. So, with things like that, I would prefer for police commissioners to be elected, not appointed. I would prefer for what's another, like federal ICAC is great because our federal representatives need to be held to a higher standard. That's one of the few exceptions I'll make to bureaucracy. I think that bureaucracy in the main, we should try and streamline as much as possible, but there's absolutely a place for stuff like that. I'm somewhere between a classical liberal and a monarchist. There are some, in no way do I think that ANCAP would work, because my whole reason for being a libertarian is to provide a balance of power. Government should balance power with corporations, and citizens should effectively balance power with both.
How very
So
nuanced and sensible of you.
So when it comes to things like the fire department, look, is it really going to help to have competition in the market? Not really. And as a matter of fact, a lot of our fire services are actually volunteer anyway, like the Rural Fire Service, SES. A lot of that is volunteer anyway. And I think that that is a good thing because it gives Australians a sense of civic duty that, honestly, we've been losing, which is a shame. Things like the fire department, the military shouldn't be privatized either. I think that's one of the actual things. There are some people who will say that you can have private law courts. No, I disagree with that. The law must be administered by the state.
Can you imagine corporate-owned law courts?
Ah, dear. Law brought to you by Apple.
Oh, it'd be idiocracy all over again, where the lawyer sits down and is like, brought to you by Carl's Jr. Oh,
although I do believe that Domino's should fix the potholes in the road.
Look, they use the road the most, so
Yeah.
They actually do that in places where the where the local governments don't fix the roads. There have actually been potholes that have been filled and then stenciled across the top of it, "This pothole brought to you by Domino's."
glorious. Look, I'm totally okay with that, mainly because I think it's hilarious, and potholes being filled, they kind of need to be filled. That being said, with the weather we've been having lately, there's a pothole at the end of my street. I did say pothole and not plot hole.
You said pothole.
I said good. I was like, did I say plot hole for a moment there? But there's a pothole that's about 1 meter by 2.5 meters, so a decent sized pothole. It's maybe 30 centimeters deep,
Wow.
or 12 duck foot
That's a
for
pond.
our American friends. And it was filled, I think it was filled 3 weeks ago, then it was filled 2 weeks ago, then it was filled 1 week ago, and it needs to be filled again.
No, they need to just build the road around it. It's permanent.
I think it's very much permanent. I think we just need hover cars. Because that obviously makes sense and would not be a disaster.
Not very
Actually-
efficient.
I've had a thought. What if we all got some bitumen, whatever, some shovels, whatever, went out filling potholes, and then we stenciled over our Venmo, Cash App, whatever.
Oh, look, it'd probably put us on the nightly news at the very least. Although, unfortunately, asphalt's not... actually, it is pretty cheap. That's a lie. It's very cheap. That's why it's used.
If I fix a road, I get to drive on that road however I want.
Look, it's like a particular person in my life who has a genetic relationship who I will not name at the risk of... look, once you hear what I'm about to say, I'm sure you'll know. But they, at one point in their life, found themselves in traffic court, and they were allegedly, I wasn't there obviously, but allegedly the magistrate asked them, blank, do you believe that you have a right to the entirety of the road? To which obviously they responded with no sir, but apparently they were standing there thinking, and I quote, well, I pay taxes for the whole road.
Paid for the whole road, gonna use the whole road.
Kind of like the old saying, I paid for the whole speedometer, I'm going to use the whole speedometer.
A little bit extra.
I shouldn't admit to this, but the last time I drove up and back from Sydney, I did go 100 miles an hour on the M1.
Is that 140, is it?
160.
It's about 160. Look, to be fair, and this is not me saying that I did do this, I may or may not have done this, but it was late at night, there were lots of trucks that were also doing 140, I was coming up from Sydney, and I was on my L's.
Literally double your speed limit.
Yeah.
And, you know, the way I figured it, the trucks all are talking to each other. If there are any cops around, they wouldn't be doing 140.
Yeah.
This is in the days before Waze, too. Waze makes it even easier to speed and not get caught.
Yeah. Look, there are various governments that want to disable that function in Waze.
If Waze wants to sponsor us, get in touch.
Yeah, you can send an email to blank@blank.com.
Yeah. If they do, I'll admit to some of my driving records. I'm going to stay quiet now. I'll get arrested.
Look, I'm actually kind of shocked that I have never gotten a speeding ticket. It's one of the it's something I'm rather proud of, and I have no idea how, given that when I was on red P plates, I was driving around in a car that had vinyl graphics up the side of it and LED underglow.
Too obvious. It must be a trap.
See, I have paid for speeding tickets, and as far as I'm concerned, I pay for the privilege of speeding.
Well, look, I actually personally find the notion of a speeding fine mildly offensive. And here's the reason why. It effectively says that speeding is perfectly okay, provided you're rich enough to pay for it.
I mean, I'm not rich enough to pay for it. That's why I use Waze.
I never cared about the money. It was the points. I didn't want to lose my license. And I came close.
Look, the point's totally okay. If someone's driving like an absolute dickhead, take their license off them. But it's the actual financial component of it, I don't like it, because if you're on $200,000 a year, $150 speeding ticket or whatever they are, I've never had one. I legitimately don't know what a speeding ticket costs.
It's $129 for up to 10 k's over.
Okay, $129 speeding ticket when you're on $200,000 a year is, who fucking cares? But if you're living below the poverty line on JobSeeker, kind of becomes a lot more all of a sudden.
Yeah. I got, I think it totaled up to about $1,500 in fines while I was on JobSeeker.
Ouch.
But when you're on JobSeeker, you're allowed to pay them off at $20 a fortnight, no matter how big they get. So I already had that set up, and I got some more fines, and I called them up, and the lady on the phone's like, oh, you've got a fair bit here, do you want to raise the fortnightly amount? I'm like, no, I don't want it to seem like a punishment, you know?
Just drag it out for as long as possible and feel it as little as possible.
I don't know how long I was paying that off for, but I don't remember ever noticing.
Oh, look, when I was delivering pizzas when I was at uni, one of the guys I worked with allegedly got a fine for walking on the train tracks. And they got to pay it off at 50 cents a week.
Wow.
Allegedly. But yeah, back on politics though. Something I did want to share with everyone, so I'm going to put it on the screen right now, is this report from 2020 that we were referring to earlier about nuclear power. And just for anyone out there who, doesn't buy the whole nuclear power is really expensive to set up but cheap to run in the long term, they're like, no, it's cheap to set up and then it's just cheap in general. This is a report from the International Energy Agency.
For those of us who can't see what's up on the screen, which page are you on?
I'm on page 48 of this 223-page report. It's a real page-turner. But looking... So this is the LCOE, which is the levelized cost of electricity, or basically it's what you have to sell the electricity at to break even at the end of the particular generation method's lifespan. And as we can see here, we've got nuclear, ranging all the way from that looks like somewhere around $40-$45 per megawatt hour, all the way up to 100 with the outliers. But most of it lays in around this 50 to 75, with the median value being up somewhere around $70 per megawatt hour. Compare that, for example, to solar PV, which is photovoltaic for utility scale, because you've also got commercial and residential. As you can see, at the utility scale, it drops down to about the same low point as nuclear, but also goes a lot higher on its outliers. But its median is actually lower than the median of nuclear, which I actually found rather interesting. I wasn't expecting to find that. Obviously, when you start scaling down and go into residential solar PV, it just becomes more expensive due to installation costs.
But let's leave that out for a moment, because it's generally the end user who's shouldering those costs. It's not necessary.
So that's really interesting. So looking there, nuclear, it competes fairly cost-wise on level with solar at a utility scale. But what I found really, really interesting, and where I think nuclear, going past the initial upfront cost and trying to finance that, just looking at a whole cost of life argument, when you go down to the next page, so page 47, or in the PDF it says 49, and you look at a breakdown by a couple of different countries, how it compares. If you look at India, the US, China, or even Europe, nuclear starts becoming more expensive than utility scale solar PV. The exception here is in Japan, and if I'm understanding this correctly, I believe the reason for that is mainly because Japan has no land, so putting up utility scale solar costs a lot more due to the land it's sitting on.
But what about offshore wind? Why is that the most expensive? Surely they're not going to be using the sea for anything. Except whaling.
Cost.
The only
Anything you put in the ocean is high maintenance.
There's that, but comparing offshore wind to other places that do offshore wind, I think it's a combination of a couple of things. But I think the main reason that Japan is having it cost so much more for offshore wind is due to the extra stuff that you have to add to make it be able to withstand tsunamis, because that's something Japan has to deal with. Whereas places like Europe, India, the US don't have tsunamis as big of a problem due to their geographic location.
It might be the typhoons as well.
It could also be a lot of other factors.
Although, if there's one thing I'd like to point out, and this is perhaps some good news for us, wind and solar in India and onshore wind and solar in India and China, both cheaper than coal.
Yeah, much cheaper than coal.
Which is excellent because it means that rapidly industrializing countries may not put as much of a carbon footprint in there.
Well, they're not. And you see a lot of stories coming out of Africa with this as well, where these small isolated villages that used to have diesel generators and hand pumps for pumping water up from bore wells are now switching to solar and electric pumps for a couple of reasons. One, they don't have to make a 100-kilometer trek into the nearest town to buy diesel fuel with solar. So that's a huge benefit. The other thing is that an electric pump just needs less maintenance than a diesel pump.
Less moving parts.
Less moving parts. You're not having to deal with, combustion temperatures. So you don't have stuff wearing out, because ultimately parts and machines wear out due to heat. Friction rubs together, generates heat, causes the material to wear away. Cause an explosion several thousand times a minute inside a cylinder. That's a lot of heat. So a lot of places that are rapidly industrializing are doing it off the back of renewables because it's just the more economic choice at this point.
And this is the thing that I'd like to see happen. Like, I'm actually going to posit a suggestion that the reason nuclear isn't competitive these days is because renewables are 20, 30 years ahead of it.
Yeah.
At least in Australia, we've had 25 years of no nuclear exploration at all because there's no point. You're not allowed to do it in Australia.
Yep.
Similarly, there's been a lot of pressure in developed countries against nuclear from environmentalist groups. So there hasn't been much investment in it. What I would suggest is if we let nuclear and solar coexist, solar will obviously have the lead, and wind as well. Obviously, they're going to have the lead. Mm-hmm. But they've also got, generally speaking, about a 20 to 25 year lifespan, whereas nuclear tends to be longer. It'll be interesting to see in that 20 to 25 year lifespan whether solar and wind continue to have efficiency gains, or whether they tend to become a little bit more solved and nuclear catches up. That's what I would find interesting over the longer term. Obviously, that has nothing to do with climate change because that process is longer than climate change. We need to do something about it now.
Yeah, well, that's another fairly popular argument when you're talking about solving the issue of climate change and where we generate our energy from. Obviously, if your goal is to solve that issue, fossil fuels are immediately off the table. Obviously. But when talking nuclear versus renewables, nuclear, again, sorry Mitchell, but it falls flat on its face due to the construction times. We don't have the 8 to 12 years it takes to build all of these nuclear power plants that we need.
Which is not only that, like in terms of innovation, it's so much easier to innovate something that can be done by anyone without any real education or policies or anything like that. So you can experiment with wind turbines in your backyard with stuff you've made yourself, but you can't do that with nuclear. So
well,
you need a large.
If you've ever watched Young Sheldon,
yeah, well you could, but you're going to get arrested.
Yeah, so I mean, there's another spot where, whether you like nuclear or not, if you're going to be honest, the simple fact is that nuclear is just not going to cut the mustard.
No, not in the next 10 years. Especially, it'll be interesting to see what happens with Britain putting in all their small modular reactors. I think they've got about 25 of them planned or something like that. Rolls-Royce is taking care of the contract for that. But, yeah, again, I'm not suggesting that the Australian government must immediately switch to nuclear. I have a fondness for nuclear, and I think it has potential, but I'd like to think I'm not part of a cult, as Michael West would like to would like to characterize us.
I think that was more of saying Sky News is a cult.
Oh, well, on that we agree.
Which, let's be honest, I'm pretty sure that if you don't toe the party line on Sky News, you won't be staying there very long. Which, just to be clear, they're a private organisation. That is their prerogative to do. If they want to only hire idiots that will push the party line, more power to them. But I also have the right to call them fucking idiots for it.
I can't stand blowhards, no matter the political persuasion.
Agreed.
In Australia, we tend to have more of them that are on the right.
I don't think that's unique to Australia, though. I would like to remind you that a particular country that may or may not also share a name with a town in Japan, which no one's going to get that joke, so never mind. The joke being, there was a sketch back in when I was in high school, and they were like, mocking people going into the Middle East to wage war, to bring freedom and democracy, and find weapons of mass destruction. They find the weapons of mass destruction, and it says on the side, made in the U.S., and then the guy that's playing America jumps in, that's USA. It's a town in Japan. But back on the topic, a particular country, which may or may not rhyme with a town in Japan, was run by a particular... This can't be right. I think I might have suffered too much brain damage from all the brain force and watching Sky News, but it's saying on my notes here it was run by Donald, and then it's just blanked out, so I'm going to assume the only logical conclusion would be Duck.
Yeah, well, let me remind you that the Young Turks exists as well.
You want to elaborate on that?
Not really. But I will say, however, that their 2016 election coverage meltdown was glorious.
I didn't see that.
Look it up. It's pretty funny. They're just steadily losing it over the night as they're realizing that Donald Trump is winning. And regardless of your feelings on Donald Trump, watching the Young Turks lose it was a glorious dose of Schadenfreude.
Oh, look, watching anyone have a mental breakdown over something that is out of their control is generally quite entertaining.
Let me put it to you this way. If Chunk Laker, however you say his name, got schooled by Ben Shapiro in a debate, that's a problem.
That is a problem because Ben Shapiro did literally once argue that people would just sell their underwater homes.
Look, Ben can't please his wife. I don't know why we listen to what he has to say.
Oh, look, I'm sure that, when he comes home, she's like, I've made it so dry for you. Tom, your face tells me that you don't get the joke.
I'll stay out of that one.
Look, for those that don't get the joke, there was a song that was put out by a particular rapper, and they called it WAP, which is an acronym
do the research.
For
do the research.
Yeah, do your research as to what that means. We've got to keep this G-rated. But Ben Shapiro decided to go on a moral tirade about it and said how his wife, who is he either said doctor or gynecologist, I forget.
My wife's a doctor, folks.
Yeah, you know, like, my wife's a doctor, and she says that they're not supposed to do that unless they have a serious medical condition.
Now, to be charitable to Ben, we might assume he was making reference to the whole idea of get buckets of it. But let's not be charitable to Ben, because it's not fun not to be charitable to Ben.
Maybe. But he has enough media training that he should know better. And let's be honest, making fun of Ben Shapiro is really fun.
Oh, absolutely, he's such a manlet. He's shorter than I am, and that's saying something.
Oh, look, Mitch, did you see that meme? Did you see that meme I shared earlier about how, look, I will revoke my atheism, and the evidence that I would need that God is real is were he to drop a piano on Ben Shapiro. Doesn't even have to be a grand piano because he's pretty small.
Sorry, Tom, what were you saying?
Oh, no, I've lost it now.
Sorry, man.
I'm just
I
half
mean-
paying attention because I know my dinner's almost ready.
What are we having for dinner tonight, Tom? Let's just get off topic and get back on topic.
Lasagna.
Yep. Lasagna's,
I dig it.
It's food. It's definitely food.
I want you guys to know just how much I resisted the temptation to go out and get McDonald's before this taping.
Look, when I was at uni, one of the compulsory courses of my degree was politics, economics, and society. And our lecturer for this particular topic, he looked exactly like Colonel Sanders. And he knew it. And he would constantly be using Yum Foods as an example. For those that don't know, Yum Foods is the parent company of KFC. So on the last lecture of semester, everyone that took that subject that semester did the only rational thing we could do. We all bought KFC to the lecture. And it was as hilarious as you think it would be.
Amazing.
It was great. No one said anything. No one laughed about it. We just all walked in quietly, sat down with our KFC, and got on with the lecture. And everyone just knew the joke. And it was just the best thing ever. But anyway, moving along, because, oh man, I really want KFC now.
I'm so hungry.
I don't care, I love it.
Look, it's probably killing me, but then again, so is breathing. What am I going to do about it?
Studies show that 100% of people who ingest oxygen die.
This is true. Which actually, that is an interesting segue to a rather interesting topic that's been on my mind a bit lately. Have you guys thought about how scientific studies are used for propaganda?
Yeah.
Like, so, for example, using what would be a topic that's going to be as unemotive as possible? So, looking at, let's go with climate change. That's a fun topic that I'm sure no one will get emotive about. So, when a particular oil company, who won't be named, found out that, hey, climate change is happening, and we're pretty sure it's because we're burning fossil fuels. So for those who are not aware, climate science was started by ExxonMobil. That's where we initially found out that climate change is happening and it's probably caused by us.
Unfortunate for them.
Feel free to appreciate the irony in that. Hence why oil companies are now building their oil rigs that are supposed to last the next 50 years 10 meters higher to account for the sea levels rising, because they know that burning their products is going to do that. So just to be clear, this is not some loony left-wing thing. Oil companies are the ones that discovered this thing. But what a lot of them did was they would, once they realized that, once it got out of the oil companies and other people started looking into it, and it was like, hey, it became a political issue, and they're like, hey, we need to stop burning fossil fuels. These same oil companies would then go and fund studies that would go and look at the issue and be like, okay, what other than the thing that we already know is causing it could possibly be causing this that we could blame it on? And then you have a study that says, oh, it might be this thing that's causing it. More research needed before we can do anything. I guess we'll just have to keep burning fossil fuels for the next 100 years in the meantime. But it doesn't just get done with that. I mean, it's been done with fats and sugars in food. It was done with cigarettes, where the cigarette companies would intentionally go and put together a study designed to say, oh, this thing that we're pretty sure our product is causing, what else could we possibly try and blame it on, and go and try and prove it, basically work backwards from their conclusion. What are our thoughts on that method of propaganda?
It's effective because most people aren't educated in how to peer review something themselves.
I mean,
Not
most
until you
people...
understand the subject and how to actually assess the science in it, that you're able to work out that they're full of shit.
Well, most people aren't well educated to begin with. Like, where do you even... Like, my dad is rather fond of quoting the Rumsfeld speech. You've got the known knowns, the known unknowns, the unknown knowns, and the unknown unknowns. What are you supposed to do if you don't even know that you don't know something?
Yeah.
Well, you suffer badly from the Dunning-Kruger effect, and you don't know how much you don't know. Which, I mean, kind of comes to the question, because do you think that the presenters on Sky News that chap on about, you know, how we need more coal and we need nuclear and renewables are just bad, do you think that they're aware that what they're saying most of the time is bullshit? Or do you think they're unaware that they're bullshitting, they genuinely believe it?
50-50. Some of them are really dumb.
Some of them are really dumb. So let's just go with an example, and this is all our opinion. But Peter Credlin, let's start there.
I cannot stand the sound of her voice, and that is my opinion.
Look, here's a fun game we can play. Really dumb or lying?
Really dumb, and that's not an opinion, fact.
Tom's taking a hard fact on Peter Credlin being really dumb.
Yep, so to me.
Like, if we're to take the example of how quickly they've switched from, oh no, we have to be going to clean coal, going from that to, oh no, we have to be going to nuclear, there's a good deal of shillery going on there.
Just a little bit. It's almost like they receive a lot of money from mining companies.
Well, yeah, actually, I read an article this week saying that mining companies are actually looking at starting up the uranium mines.
Well, that would make sense why Sky News is pushing nuclear then.
I hate the fact that there's commercial interest in it. I would, as someone who loves nuclear, I would want people to be opening up the discussion for the right reasons, but
well, I mean,
I can't have nice things, can I?
Okay, I'm going to have to call you out on this one now, Mitch, because I'm getting very strong mixed messages about this now.
Go on.
Because you're saying you don't want the government throwing any money at it.
I don't.
And now it kind of sounds like you're saying you don't want private companies throwing money at it.
I don't want private companies
or am I misunderstanding
to
what you're saying there?
I don't want private companies to use their monopolistic stranglehold on the media to force to as propaganda to force people to think a certain way without framing a good public debate, because it's only through discussion and consensus that we really understand something.
So really the only way to achieve that would be to have the government fund education and research on the subject.
Well, who else is going to fund it?
Koch brothers?
So the government would like to get involved. Just
Not in
maybe
Australia, they don't.
Not in Australia, they don't, but
I'm sure I've told that story before. I think I have told that story
You did tell that
before.
story.
Yeah.
Koch brothers don't fund stuff in Australia, so if anyone says that they do, they're probably full of shit. I mean, there are bad people that do fund a lot of stuff in Australia that's bad. Gina Reinhardt, Clive Palmer. Oh, look, I'm still laughing at the fact that, actually, I think he won 1 Senate seat. I'm just going to double check that.
Palmer?
Yeah.
I think I remember
he
seeing
got 1
that.
Senate seat. What is it? Let's see. Here we go. Let's go look it up and check. Yeah, he got 1 Senate seat. $100 million, 1 seat. Pretty sure IKEA sells them for like $59. Is that joke still
Would have
funny?
been better off using that money to bribe someone that already had a seat.
Well, I think he does that too.
It's called lobbying.
Which, look, I think lobbying should be illegal.
Yeah, but that cuts both ways.
Yeah, I'm aware. I don't think that money should be a variable in that equation.
I mean, I agree. Personally, I agree.
Like, I get that means that also politicians that I like won't be able to take money from things that I like. I'm aware of that.
If anything, it benefits me better because we don't have any money to throw at politicians.
Well, that too. I mean, the party that I like doesn't take corporate donations anyway. So I don't think that they'd be that much worse off if you just said no donations at all and just set every party that runs a fixed budget.
Mm. Does that mean then that we should reform our votes that you like money for votes that you get? Because I think that's probably the best way to. If we were going to eliminate corporate donations, if you're going to eliminate donating money to political parties, which is probably not a bad idea, then should we be instead remunerating parties on votes? Like, we already do this for 4% and up. If you get 4% of the vote, you actually get money per vote you got.
I'm aware of this.
Should we then... Sorry, go on.
I don't know. Even with our current system, with regards to remunerating parties for votes when they get 4% or up of the primary vote, even that I see severe issues with, because if you were to go and say that if you get more than 4% of the primary vote, you get a fixed amount, and just that amount, regardless of how many more votes you get, I'd probably be okay with that. But where we have it at the moment, where once you get past that threshold, you get money, the more votes you get, I see that causing issue with whoever was most popular last year now has more money to run in the next election.
Mm-hmm. It is an issue.
Which I don't think that that's really good for democracy. At least not from the standpoint of trying to get politicians that genuinely represent the interests of the constituency. Because whether you like it or not, your average person is not an expert in anything, which is part of the reason I have a massive gripe with common sense, because given your average person is not an expert in something, why should I care what their thoughts on a particular topic are?
It's like, yeah, you're not entitled. You're entitled to. You have the right to speak an opinion, but you're not entitled to have that opinion considered to be of any worth unless you've seriously put in the time and effort to understand it.
Yeah, and the majority of people not only haven't put in the time and effort to genuinely understand it, but literally do not have the tools to understand why they haven't put in the time and effort.
And that's on education, and that's on those of us who are not adequately framing the discussion so as to invite curiosity.
Yes. I mean, if you look at the way that nuclear gets talked about, you have one side saying, yep, it's the greatest thing ever, we definitely need to be doing this, not offering any way of how or any nuance, any terms of the risks that may be involved with the various different methods of how you go about doing it. They're just like, yep, we need to do this. And the other side is just saying, no, it's a terrible idea, we should never do it. And it just doesn't invite curiosity, it doesn't invite interest, it's more tribalistic nonsense.
And that when we considering Sky News talking about nuclear as being the key thing we've been talking about, I have been making a concerted effort not to be tribalist about this. Like, I have a bias. I clearly have a bias. But I'm trying to be mindful of, okay, so what are the pitfalls? What are the what are the ways in which nuclear might fall short? Timeframes, setup costs, all of that sort of thing. How does that not address the issue at the moment, but it might be useful on a long-term scale? Anyway.
And I mean, I get the arguments for nuclear, and it's really when you go and start looking at how it's going to be implemented in the real world is where I see the real issues arise with it.
Costs, regulatory.
Because like Kyle Hill, who is a science communicator, says, and is a huge fan of nuclear. Mitch, if you haven't watched his pro-nuclear stuff, you definitely should.
I will look that up. Give me a moment.
He talks about how, yep, it's safe now because we've developed it. There's safety stuff in place. In the long run, it is cheap. But I have immense respect for the guy, but I'm yet to see him come out and admit that unless you're wanting to talk about the government going and setting up nuclear power plants, and having a government that's in a term for at least the period it takes to set it up, it's never going to happen.
Yeah, and that's my consideration in Australia. Like, the Labor Party is ideologically opposed to nuclear power. The Greens is ideologically opposed to nuclear power. If the Liberal government wanted to do something about it, they should have done something in the last 3 years. But
the last 10 years. That's the other thing that really pisses me off when people say, oh, the government hasn't done anything about this, so I'm going to vote for the last guys that were in power. And it's like, they had just had 10 years to do something about this issue, and they've done nothing.
It's actually one of the main reasons why I don't like Johnny Howard.
Go on.
Because Johnny Howard was the one who spearheaded the anti-nuclear thing, and
I did not know that.
And because the Liberal Party is the party of Howard these days, they have to make sure that they maintain John Howard's legacy at any cost.
Yeah, so nuclear.
When he was in was really the best time to do it too.
Yeah, exactly.
Back then.
Yeah, this is the thing. If the Liberal Party didn't want renewable energy, if they wanted to serve the interests of the mining companies, then they should have done it back when they were actually having decent, mining, booms. The country was, paying down the national debt. Costello had squared the national debt by 2007. Surely if they wanted to give handouts to their mining mates and all of that sort of stuff, they should have gone nuclear back then.
Yeah, well, back then nuclear was seen as a threat to coal.
What a benefit hindsight is.
And now coal is dying, whether you like it or not. Fossil fuels in general are dying. I saw a fairly interesting analysis, I think it was on Wendover Productions, put it out about why fuel prices are expensive and why they're never going back to being reasonably cheap again. And basically, when global oil prices went negative in 2020, that was a signal that was sent to the fossil fuel industry that their time is coming to an end. So now they're restricting supply to keep the price high. Because ultimately, whenever you have an industry where it's a natural monopoly due to high startup costs, like oil drilling, for example, and you only have a handful of players in it, market forces are going to just push the price high because there is no competition. Anywhere that you have a natural monopoly, market forces do not work, so privatizing it is a bad idea.
Well, I'll sit on that one for a bit, but what was I going to say? I was going to say something, I can't remember.
Well, I mean, I can't think of a single industry that's ever been privatized that fits into the category of natural monopoly where it actually resulted in better service and lower prices for consumers. I can't think of a single historical example where that has happened.
Telecommunications?
Has it resulted in better service and lower prices?
By some of the startups, yes.
Yeah, I think think it has to a degree, but we didn't like. It's changed so much since it went private that it was like the internet wasn't really big back then, so it's kind of hard to compare. But I think it has kind of improved. But it doesn't work for every industry, and some things need to be partly government at least, like the postal service. It can be privatised, but it also needs to have a government element to it.
Doesn't the postal service actually make a profit? I know it does in America.
It does, but
Australia, I'm not sure.
At the very least, we have competition in the postal service anyway.
Yeah, the postal service is one of those things where it's profitable in metropolitan areas, but once you get more isolated, it's not profitable at a fair price. And if you want to offer that service to every civilian in the country, you need a government part that caters to them for a fair price. While, like if you go out in the middle of nowhere, you're not going to get as many packages delivered by FedEx. They're going to come from the Australian Postal Service. Whereas here, you very rarely get it from the Australian Postal Service.
This is one of the reasons actually I'm so big on stuff like work from home. I'd love to see more development in regional areas, which would allow that kind of infrastructure to exist.
Yeah.
Oh look, I like work from home a lot, and that's not just because I do it most of the time. Look, I enjoy getting the 2.5 hours that I would spend every day traveling back, because I wasn't being paid for that time.
Yeah.
But to answer your question about Australia Post's profitability, I have a 9 News article here stating that Australia Post reported a before-tax full-year profit of $100.7 million.
That's not much.
In the 2021 financial year, when they had a boom from parcel deliveries due to COVID.
Yeah, that's not much.
I mean, it's technically profit.
But if they were privatised, they'd be trying to raise that profit by maybe servicing the areas where they make more money.
Well, they'd cut services to areas that are expensive to service. So if you live in those areas, you're definitely not getting a better service under a privatisation model. And like Mitch said, that's not a huge profit given the size of the business. So they're going to try and push that up, and I don't think that there's that many ways to make parcel delivery that much cheaper.
Look, I think as it works in Australia, like you've got public health and you've got private health, and they both compete with each other. Public health is winning at the moment. You've got the postal service and you've got private couriers. They're both competing with each other. I think as long as you can have something where industry can compete with the government to force them both into efficiencies, I don't have a problem with that state of affairs. I think if there was only one player and that player was the government, I think that would be as monopolistic as having the fuel companies with high startup costs, restricting supply. Like it would be bad, just in different ways.
Well,
it would lend itself to inefficiency and to lack of innovation because it doesn't need to innovate.
The main difference that you get there, though, is that when you're talking about an industry that does move towards natural monopoly status, when you're talking about it being in private hands versus public hands, at least in public hands, theoretically, the goal of operating it is to benefit the people rather than make profit for shareholders.
But as we've seen in state-owned companies, oftentimes they can be set up with people who maybe get the job not based on merit, but based on who they know, all of that sort of thing.
I'm not saying that there's no problem with government-owned stuff. Corruption is obviously really fucking bad, and you've got to have something in place to deal with that. But
I always like to say, would you prefer that everything be government-owned if it was the Liberals running the country?
Yeah, that's actually a pretty good argument.
See, I think it's important that the government owns and runs anything that would be considered a human right, and I also think that anything that a prisoner gets, it should be a human right in that country. So, medical, they get that for free. Everyone in the country should get it for free to the same standard. But it's not profitable to give that to everyone in the country, so you need the government to run hospitals. But then it helps innovation to have the private sector. So wherever they can get away with it, there needs to be a private sector in each industry. But there has to be government in the essential ones that everyone should have a right to.
You've got to have that safety net.
Yeah. So the government's there to supply the bare minimum, and their goal isn't profit. Their goal is the bare minimum to every citizen, no matter where they are. Like with the postal service out in the middle of the desert, they still get postal service. But if you want innovation and improvement of service, then you need to have some kind of privacy in there. But really, the only things that you don't want to make private are like emergency response things, so like police and military and ambulances and fire engines and all that. So everything else can have a private element to it. It's only going to benefit in the long run.
Well, I mean, I rather like our healthcare system.
Honestly, we have the best of both worlds these days.
When it comes to healthcare, I think we strike a pretty good balance. I mean, everyone's guaranteed the bare minimum. But if you want to go and pay more for, discounted boob jobs or whatever.
I do think we need to put a bit more into the public sector of healthcare, because there is a staff shortage nationwide at the moment, and it's leading to longer wait times, which I know personally people that have been greatly affected by that.
I've actually been doing some focus groups because I signed up with medical testing, but I hate blood tests, so I can't actually have experimental treatments, which sucks. They pay you quite well for it. But
I should sign up.
Sorry?
I should sign up and help me with the fuel cost.
You might actually do quite well to. Although generally speaking, they try and keep you in the place for like a certain number of days, like you can't leave or anything like that. So keep that in mind.
They have PlayStation.
I think they do have entertainment.
I would hope so.
So yeah, I've actually been doing some focus testing, and one of the things they actually had me in a focus group for was, do you think that people access medical procedures that they don't need? So is that they're actually working through, they're trying to, like with staffing shortages and all that sort of thing, they're trying to figure out how can we get less people to use the health system for things they don't need.
I think
that's another thing too. Like I hear a lot of complaints about if you put too much in the health system, or even like the welfare system, people take advantage of it and they overuse it. But I think that cutting funds to something because people are misusing it and diminishing that service is not the right way of dealing with it. It's like if you get like a shopping centre that has graffiti in the toilet, so they stop taking care of the toilet, and everyone has to, go to this really crappy place, when other shopping centres just hire more security guards or more cleaners and put more money into it, and they're a nicer place to go to.
No, it's simple. You have a copay that's dependent on your taxable income in the last year.
Yeah. I mean,
those who can't afford the copay don't have to pay it. But those
if your taxable income's below the tax-free threshold, you should definitely not be paying a copay.
Oh yeah, but if you have money to throw around, if you've got a nice retirement fund, then you absolutely shouldn't be using the ambulances as a taxi to the shops that are next to your hospital, for example.
I don't think that happens as often as Sky News would have us believe. Actually,
yeah.
No, that's more of a current affair thing.
Yeah, but it means I can rag on boomers, so I'm going to claim it.
Oh, look, ragging on boomers is a popular thing to do. What was I going to say?
Because of their reaction. They're all so angry, it's funny.
I think when it comes to things like healthcare, I think as far as funding is concerned, it's a bit of a balancing act. Because there is obviously a point where you overfund something. Any service can be overfunded. But honestly, I don't realistically see any government service ever ending up in a situation where it's genuinely overfunded just because of the way that, politics and government budgets work. I don't see that as a realistic thing to have actually happen, at least not in a Western democracy.
Well, there's one question to be asked: can you have more money than you can possibly poke a stick at, and you simply can't spend it all? But
Yes,
another question is,
Elon Musk.
no, then he'll just start spending it on his desire to get people to Mars.
Even then, look, it's a bit of a joke in leftist circles, where you play the spend all of Elon Musk's money game, where you have to go and, if you had all of Elon Musk's money and you have to spend it all, what would you buy? You're not allowed to buy anything that generates more money.
I would build my own island, like have it floating out in the Pacific.
Cool, you
to
just
be the
spent
size of
0.001% of Elon Musk's money.
As
You
a
don't know how big my
libertarian,
island is.
as a libertarian, I approve of your seasteading.
You'd be able to see it from space. I'd spend every cent.
Look, just make a personal island you can see from space, just in the shape of a giant dick.
Man,
No, just
we're
make it
getting
look exactly like Tasmania, call it Tasmania 2, and then float it into a better climate.
But okay, we're getting into some serious schizo-libertarian sort of stuff, and I'm all for it.
But,
Love
it. Realistically, can you ever fund a government service to the point where the majority of people would agree it's overfunded?
I guess the better question to ask is there a point at which we're just getting diminishing returns to throw money at it?
Yeah, there's definitely a point.
I don't think we've ever reached that point.
But I don't think we've ever reached it, and I don't think it's realistically ever going to happen.
I'd argue it happens in education. I think part of the problem...
We need way more in education.
we need to
Go
do
on.
more work with education, but the issue with teacher pay is that it doesn't scale with career length. So you can actually get really well paid as a starting out teacher. Like, you can actually get $80,000 a year with only a couple of years' work. I was actually on $80,000 in my first year out.
Is that a case of you can do that, or that is what generally happens?
That is what generally happens. If you look at pay scales between the public system, the independent system, and the Catholic system, you generally do
Catholics have
quite
their
well.
own system.
Yeah, well, I can't speak for it. I'm not in the Catholic system. But if you look at it, they're generally comparable. You can be earning good money out as a teacher. But the problem is it doesn't scale. Like, if you stay in your job for 20, 30 years, you can find yourself earning high 100s to almost $200,000 if you dedicate yourself to that career. In teaching, that doesn't happen. You'll earn $100,000 if you are a leading proficient teacher. You might earn a little bit more than that for a little bit more qualifications, for being a principal or something like that. But given how many principal jobs there are versus teacher jobs,
obviously everyone can't progress to become a principal.
And that's the problem. Career progression and getting paid appropriately is a problem in teaching. Also, the main problem that kicks so many people out of teaching before they even hit that point is the workload. If they were to reduce the workload, and there were to be a cultural shift that placed more trust on teachers and put more trust in teachers' ability to discipline the kids, then I dare say teaching would be a nicer place to work in, and people wouldn't be so burned out. But the problem we've had in teaching, and I'm sorry I'm ranting about it because I've been working in the industry for 2 years and I'm already burned out because of COVID, and then the vaccine mandates kicked out so many teachers, and then people left after that because they took on those workloads because there weren't enough teachers to fill the gaps for the ones that weren't vaccinated, and so people were burned out and then they left the career. That's why they've got rid of the vaccine mandates, because they're desperate for teachers to return. There is a teaching staffing crisis right now.
Isn't that what the strikes recently were about?
Yeah. And pay is secondary. They just want better conditions. They want to have a life outside of teaching.
Which is perfectly reasonable.
Well, you get better conditions by having more teachers, and you get more teachers by raising the pay. It's a simple solution, but I know there's other things they can do, but that's the short term.
Well, I don't even think that's a short-term solution because it takes time to train new teachers.
That's one thing they're working on.
A lot of them that have left would come back if they were offered more money.
Would they, though? Because if they've... I mean, I don't have the data in front of me to be able to corroborate Mitch's claim that they left due to vaccine mandates, but just for argument's sake, because I can't be bothered looking it up, let's just go with that being 100% factually correct. If they've left because they have an objection to being vaccinated, if you want to bring them back, the solution would be to remove the mandate, which they've now done. So pay is not really the reason they left. So why would pay be the reason they'd come back?
Well, it's just an added thing to convince them to come back.
Fair.
It's more important for late career teachers. For early career teachers to get people into the field, you want to give them good conditions, because honestly, what I was getting paid, I thought was more than fair.
And you could have it that later years of education, the teachers get paid more, and in order to get to that level, they have to prove themselves in a lower year of education. So maybe you could make a career aspect of it that way, where they got something to look forward to and something to work for.
It's certainly something to go for, but like, I had to fill out a whole lot of paperwork every time I wanted to take kids on an excursion, and I'm ashamed to say that I didn't take kids on some excursions that would have been good just because I didn't have the headspace to do the paperwork.
I never learned anything on an excursion.
It's almost like you need a secretary just to do the paperwork.
Yeah, look, it's
but something
it's
else
bad.
you said, Mitch, that I'd like to challenge you on.
Yeah, absolutely.
The vaccine mandates, when they were removed, was it removed to try to get more teachers back, or was it removed because they were just no longer needed, and have kind of been removed in a lot of industries outside of... Obviously, they're still in place in medicine, last I checked, but so are vaccine mandates for a dozen other viral infections that that you've had to be vaccinated to work in medicine.
Well, up here in Queensland, they're looking at bringing back mask mandates. COVID's still ripping around the place. The numbers are pretty high. So you could make a case that the vaccine mandates still need to be in a place like a school, which is a hotbed for transmission. Now, having said that, it's very telling to me that they've removed that when people are already saying we need to bring back restrictions.
No, well, they're having a very different discussion in Queensland as they're having in New South Wales then, because at least I'm not hearing about any talk around bringing back vaccine mandates in New South Wales.
Oh, bringing back mask mandates.
Or any mandates for that matter.
Well, they're talking about it up here. So,
Alright.
yeah.
Fair enough. Personally, I think that a vaccinate or test policy would be better. Where instead of just saying, if you want to have the job, you have to be vaccinated, they could go either vaccinated, or you're going to have to present a test on a weekly, fortnightly, monthly basis, whatever.
And rat tests are cheap enough these days.
Well, they're no longer in high demand and low supply. Also, rat tests are terrible. They should be doing... Rat tests shouldn't be a thing at all. The PCR tests still have issues, but at least they're a little bit more reliable. And the testing clinics that have been doing them have gotten a lot faster at turning test results around.
That's good to know.
A drive-in clinic up the road from where I live, very conveniently located, right next to the doctor's office, so good location there. It's a drive-in one, so you just drive in, get swabbed, 6 hours, and you have your test results. Now, I mean, if you're ideologically opposed to getting vaccinated, I don't think it's that unreasonable to, when the virus is still ripping around the place, to go, well, look, if you don't want to get vaccinated, fine, but every Sunday or every second Sunday, before you're allowed to start for that week, you have to go get swabbed, You'll have the results back in 6 hours, and if you're negative, you're good to go for the week. I don't think that's unreasonable. It gives people a choice, and I mean, if you test negative, then it's irrelevant whether you're vaccinated or not for that week, and if you test positive, I guess you stay home. And work from home.
Yeah, you'd think that'd be fair, but
it seems like a reason. It seems like a good middle ground to me.
Yeah, but with all the security theatre, and I will say it was security theatre, we could have done something like that, and it would have been a good middle ground. And instead, we've been uncompromising on it, and we've burned out a lot of our teachers in the meantime.
That ultimately is a bit of a problem with not only Australian politics, but I think politics in general, is that it has become very tribalistic, and if you try and get middle ground, you're seen as being weak.
Yeah, I blame social media.
Look, blaming Zuckerberg is fun. It's all Zuckerberg's fault.
The robot did it.
The robot. I thought he was a Martian. I thought that was the joke. He was a Martian.
No, I prefer the South Park one. You cannot hope to best my style.
Jeez. Oh, actually, speaking of vaccine mandates and not being compromising in the face of, reasonableness, let's bring up the conversation I had with a particular politician that ran for a seat and did not get their seat, that I screenshotted and showed you all the conversation of. For context for our viewers, this politician ran for One Nation in a particular seat. I won't name the seat because I have enough respect to not go and call them a dickhead to their face. I'm going to do it behind their back. That's obviously more respectful. But obviously, being a One Nation candidate, they're against vaccines and they love pushing conspiracy theories. And basically, I said, provide evidence that your claim that the vaccine doesn't work is true. They linked me to the New South Wales health data for the previous week, which you can then filter it out to be for the previous 28 days. And they then proceeded to argue that actually getting vaccinated makes you more likely to die of COVID. They made that claim based off of a sample size of less than 400 people.
I don't think that's statistically significant.
They also showed that they don't understand how statistics work.
Yes, it also showed that they don't understand how statistics work. And I tried to point out to them that that sample size is not big enough to draw any conclusion off of. It's just not.
Sample size is irrelevant, though, to what they were saying, because, if you got 90% of people dying from something that only 10% of, like when they're not unvaccinated, and only 10% of people are unvaccinated, it makes the number look way smaller. Like they're talking in percentages of people dying from something, and they're still using the percentage of the total population, not the percentage of the unvaccinated people.
Well, there's that aspect too, but realistically, you don't even get to that step of analysing whether the argument is valid, because you can't draw any conclusion realistically off of a sample size that size.
One thing I noticed as well with what people who are anti-vax tend to say is that, more people died with the vaccine than those without. Yeah, because most people are vaccinated.
Yeah, which
right
is Tom's
now.
point.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. It's,
So I must have gone
1%
looking. I must have been going looking for that conversation in the group chat. Sorry.
Yeah, so did I. I couldn't remember.
But,
I was just trying to find out if it was the person I'm thinking of or what.
The terrifying bit is that person had about 6,000 people think that, yep, they know what they're talking about and voted for them to represent their area in federal parliament.
See, that's actually something I should have brought up before. When you're talking about a lot of teachers leaving because of their problem with vaccination mandates, in a way that might be a good thing, because it's a lack of education that leads to that, and I don't want those people educating kids. So yeah, we've got a shortage at the moment, but long term we're probably better off.
Look, I certainly had a lot of unlearning to do with the kids. I just feel like, guys, the vaccine is safe. I have a lot of respect for my colleagues, but I disagree with them on this. Yeah.
I think when at the beginning of the pandemic, when the talk about a potential vaccine was being talked about, I was like, I will be very upfront and say that I was of the position, I'm not sure if I'm going to trust this thing, because vaccines do generally take longer to develop. Then I went and actually tried to prove that position correct, and found out the reason why it's wrong. Being that the way that this vaccine is being developed is using technology that's just recently been made, where basically once we sequence the genome, we already have a carrier type system built for it, where we just insert the genome into it and boom, we have a vaccine.
Not only that, but we changed the structure of how we fund research into the vaccinations for this one. So normally you got one test that will determine which of the next 8 tests is going to be relevant, and those each of those 8 tests costs a lot of money, so you wait until you've done this one test to choose which one of those to do. We were just doing all 8 and then working out from that one test which of those 8 we did are relevant. It cost us a lot more money, but it cuts months of the time.
Yeah, well, it goes to show how much you can fast-track development of something when the entire world's resources start getting thrown at it.
Yeah.
But, I mean, that is my concerns around it. I'm obviously not anti-vax, not even slightly, but I get where a lot of these people are coming from, and the most frustrating bit that I find with it is that they're so insistent that they've done their research, when the simple fact that they continue to hold that position shows that they have not actually done proper research.
It's because they think that reading an article is the same as reading a scientific journal, and they don't understand the scientific method.
Well, a lot of them don't have access to scientific journals either, because the good journals you have to pay to be able to access. The ones that you pay to publish in and are free for anyone to read, those are, generally speaking, there's a few that are outliers to this, that are open access journals that are good. Generally speaking, they're not, though. And when you get people that are going on about pseudoscience, if they kind of know what they are doing and know that they need to actually provide a proper journal article, they will provide one from an open access journal that is dodgy and hope that you don't catch on to it.
Bold of you to assume they even go for these journals at all, rather than just watching YouTube videos.
Well, I'm saying the small percentage of them that actually do understand that YouTube is not a good source.
It's a small percentage.
It is a very small percentage, and apparently a particular politician does not fall into that small percentage. Yeah. It was a fun conversation I had, though.
I try to avoid these conversations.
See, I used to
like
try to
talking to a
avoid them,
wall.
but then I realised that it can be a lot of fun, and look, it's kind of like playing with your food. You know,
I see it more, it makes sense to get involved in conversations like that if they're on a public stage. So if you're doing
that too.
in a comment section, because you're not going to convince this person, but you might convince someone that would have listened to them otherwise.
Yeah.
Otherwise, if it's a private messaging, it's a waste of time.
No, and I mean, my conversation was on a public post. Fun. But yeah, the other thing with the vaccine that kind of, should have convinced a lot of people, but apparently there was some that it didn't, was the fact that the clinical trials that were run with it before it was released had very large sample sizes. You're talking tens of thousands of people. I think the Pfizer study had 42,000 people in it. Don't quote me on that. It was either 40 or 60. I can't remember which. So 20,000 in a control group, 20,000 in an experimental group. And of the 20,000 people in the experimental group, 0 hospitalizations. I mean, if that doesn't show that it's safe, I don't know what does.
Oh, the argument I was hearing from people against that was they don't know the long-term effects. But
okay, but I mean, I heard that one too. But the obvious counter-argument is, what about the long-term effects of actually getting COVID? Like being dead.
I don't think there's been too many vaccines in history that have had long-term effects. Like they just don't make them strong enough. That's why you have to have more than one.
Well, that and a lot of vaccines, especially the COVID vaccine, doesn't actually have a virus in it.
No.
All it does, within 12 hours of you getting the vaccine, everything in that syringe that was injected into you is no longer in your body. All it does is triggers, I forget which cell it is in your body, but a particular cell to start producing the spike protein. That's all the Pfizer vaccine did. So that your body would then produce the spike protein itself, and then your immune system would see the spike protein and do its thing. I mean, I don't see how you can really have long-term effects from a vaccine that doesn't even stay in your body for more than a day. Mitchell, you look like you have something to say there.
Oh no, I'm just enjoying somebody else having to say all of this instead of me. I've had this conversation often enough, and it's just nice to be. It's just nice to hear something that I agree with.
Look, it is nice to see things that you agree with.
It's music to my ears.
So look, since you look like you're enjoying yourself so much, I'm going to remind you again that nuclear power is never happening in this country.
Oh god damn it! I was enjoying myself.
Oh, fun.
And I was also just reminiscing and wishing that at some point I could move to Newcastle because it seems like a nice place.
Look,
underwater.
If it makes you feel better, I nearly ended up being on an island, and I was afraid that my landlord was going to put up my rent.
Huh. Water views.
Water views. Because where I live, there is a small, I guess, it's kind of a bastardization of a swamp and a lake. Close to the shore, there's reeds and it looks a bit swampy, but then you get out past that and it looks very lake-like. So I'm not sure exactly what to describe it as. It's a hole in the ground full of water. That's what we're going to describe it as. But obviously, with all of the rain that we've had in New South Wales, those water levels started rising. And on the other side of me, one of the access roads into the suburb that I'm in, which is kind of built up on a hill, so we were at no risk of having water actually ingress into our house.
Thank God for that.
But there was a chance that we'd get cut off. Fortunately, we haven't. But one of the access roads directly connected to our suburb was cut off, and one of the other two, about 5 kilometres up the road, it was cut as well due to water. So flooding definitely happened, and a lot of Newcastle is no longer just one big connected thing. It's a series of loosely connected islands.
Yeah, I tried to drive to Maitland the other day. It was a challenge.
I'm pretty sure you still can't get through to Rutherford from Maitland.
Oh, you can, but it took me about an hour. I went down through the mountains in some country road.
Right around the long way.
Yeah.
Wow. Gilliston Heights is very much literally an island at the moment. It's cut off.
I mean,
on
that
all
might have
sides.
changed by now. We had another 40 millimeters just here today.
It sounds like we're wrapping up. Should we cut the thing now?
Yeah, we'll wrap it up there. Look, for everyone playing along at home, subscribe, like, do all that YouTube stuff, or don't. I don't really care. And we'll see you all in 2 weeks, where we will talk about other topics, and we will see if New South Wales is still underwater or if it's burst into flames by that point. Because apparently natural disasters happening every couple of months is the normal now. And
At least we're not bored.
And yet Sky News still insists that the climate is the same as it's always been. Also, because you can't attribute any one natural disaster to climate change, because that's not how the climate works, is obvious proof that climate change is not real. So climate change is not real. Having 3 floods in one state in the very severe floods in the space of 6 months is perfectly normal. Nothing to see here. Goodbye forever.
Dear Liberals, if global warming is real, why is it cold? Curious.
Dear atheists, if humans evolved from apes, why are there still apes? Ha 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 ha. Anyway, enough mocking of people. Have a good night. Never talk to me again. And let's just see when I see Mitch put his hand up to his head on the stream so I can cut it off.
Should I not do that?
No, that was fine. That gives me a clear view. Should have done it by now. I'm concerned that it hasn't and everyone's able to see.
It's just kind of how I wave goodbye sort of thing. I don't know. Silly thing.